Okay, your stomach. Super weird that we carry around like this big bag of acid in our bodies for extracellular digestion. It's kind of strange. We have in our stomach muscles. So we have smooth muscle. We actually have 3 layers of it, which is unique to the digestive organs. Most only have 2 layers. The smooth muscle causes churning. And this is a form of mechanical digestion. So we have mechanical and chemical digestion in our stomach. We also have epithelial tissue lining our stomach, and we have glands. So we have like gastric pits that produce gastric juice. So we have the production of gastric juice. This is very acidic. In fact, it could have a pH of like 2, which is very low, right, on the pH scale. So it's super acidic. And this is actually very protective because, for example, this actually kills microbes. And also what the acid does, it tends to break down connective tissue, and it also denatures proteins. So it kills microbes, breaks down connective tissue. It denatures proteins. So when we eat a steak, for example, we actually need acid much more than, say, for example, if you ate a piece of bread. So if you're eating like bread and peanut butter, probably don't need as much acid to break down. So it's a lot harder to digest like a steak. If you think about how that would have to work to get all of that connective tissue and proteins denatured, so the amino acids could be absorbed by your small intestine. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about the transformation of a bite of steak into like this stuff that could be absorbed into our cells, okay? So if we look at this production of gastric juice, we have gastric glands. So cells inside the glands include, we have what are referred to as parietal cells. Oops, parietal. These produce acid, and the acid is hydrochloric acid, which is HCl. Very strong acid, tends to dissociate into hydrogen and chlorine very rapidly. We also have chief cells. These produce an inactive enzyme called pepsinogen. Anytime you see inogen, this means that it is inactive, and it is going to be converted to its active form once it has been secreted outside the cell into our cavity. Because you don't want to have, the big problem with our stomach is self-digestion. Like, you don't want this acid and these proteins to break down the proteins in your stomach, right? So we have to somehow get it out there before it is activated. And so this is done where we have pepsinogen in the presence of hydrochloric acid converted to pepsin. So this is active. This is inactive. Pepsin is a digestive enzyme that digests polypeptides or proteins. So proteins are amino acids that are connected by a peptide bond. And this is an enzyme that breaks those peptide bonds. So pepsin chemically digests proteins and it turns them into amino acid. So it releases amino acids. Okay. So this is a protective mechanism. We also have another protective mechanism in our stomach, and that is the mucous membrane. So we have goblet cells that produce mucus. And mucus has a variety of functions in our bodies, but this mucous membrane, this prevents gastric juice from digesting the lining of the stomach. There are a few things that can get through the mucous membrane and actually break it down. Some things that we take in our diet. So for example, if we look at things that break through that mucous membrane, alcohol is one of them, which is the reason why it gets so fast into your blood system, is it can be absorbed right through the surface of the stomach. You don't have to wait for it to get to your small intestine. Salt can go right through, and aspirin. You might have heard that aspirin causes your stomach to bleed, right? So that would break through the mucous membrane as well. So when we talk about these three things, it's probably a really bad idea after work to go home and have a beer, potato chips, and take some aspirin. Right? All of those things are going to break down your mucous membrane, and this could lead to gastric ulcers. So gastric ulcers are when your membrane starts to bleed, right? So you get digestion of it in your through your mucous membrane and into the lining. Interestingly, we have the ability to repair a lot of damage really quickly. So when we get gastric, if this happens, like if you did that, your body would probably bleed for a while, but eventually those cells would actually come together and it would heal the lining of the stomach, right? So generally, we can heal that lining of the stomach. We'll also talk about how there are some bacteria that are known to give people gastric ulcers, and those are called Helicobacter bacteria. And so H. pylori, you could have an actual infection that could lead to gastric ulcers. So when we combine this gastric juice with food, we have something new. So gastric juice plus food, this gives us chyme. And that is like a slush. It's just like this watery with everything broken down. And this is what is going to go into your small intestine. So that's important, that you don't want food, big pieces of food getting into your small intestine. It's going to go through a valve before it actually can go into the small intestine.